your questions with these spring sports. Where do you see these spring sports finishing? What do you want to know? I mean, I've done a lot of research on some of these teams and feel like I know a pretty good amount about each of them. And somebody said, hey, listen, give us a ceiling or a floor. As a lot of these schools, a lot of these programs, I should say, go into the postseason, I mean, where are they supposed to be? Who's going to win a national championship? Who has no shot? And what are you looking at with each sport remaining? So I will say, I want to check off the list right now. You've got men's golf and women's tennis. Those teams both out. Men's golf lost in Stillwater. We talked about it. University of Arkansas, Little Rock hit 6 birdies to take I say 6. They all birdied on the 18th hole. I think it's 5 birdies, all birdied on the 18th hole to beat Baylor men's golf in Stillwater and take that top 5 spot. Their season is done. When I looked at, Cooper Dawsey coming into this season and Baylor golf, the experience they had, I had a lot higher expectations for that team, and they underperformed. They did not end up where they should have been this season. They were a legitimate, in my opinion, a top 10 team most of this year. And in the beginning of the year, their rankings reflected that, being a top 20 team. And things just, golf's a volatile game. It's any course, any given Saturday or weekday or whenever they play it. And they lost it in Stillwater. So Baylor men's golf is out. Baylor women's tennis, they got a sweep of Corpus Christi in round 1 in the Waco Regionals. They got to open the first 2 rounds, the NCAA tournament at home. They swept Corpus Christi, got a really tough draw against Duke. Alex Gruskin said it yesterday. Baylor women's tennis was slighted a little bit by the committee when Duke had to come to town and play against your Lady Bears in Waco. And that was reflective in the fact that Duke won 4-3 in a really tough, it was a hard-fought, tough, close match. Duke got the best of the women's tennis team in the end. So that's recapping the 2 spring sports that have wrapped up as of right now and moving into ceiling and floor. And, hey, Rob, I want your opinion. I want you to help me out on these. Ceiling and floor for each team as they head into the postseason. I'm going to start at softball. So softball's got a game at 3:30 tomorrow against South Alabama on ESPN3. That's in the Gainesville Regional. They've got number 4 Florida, the number 4 team in the country. Florida's the 1 seed right now in the Gainesville Regional, taking on 4 seed South Florida. Baylor's 2 seed taking on 3 seed South Alabama. Mind you, South Alabama beat Alabama earlier this season. Montana Fouts and Alabama. It's not a bad team at all. Like, a lot of folks see that like, Troy or South Alabama or Arkansas State or UTSA or Texas State, and they're like, it's a small school. James Madison. But a lot of these small schools have solid softball programs. Maybe not all the ones I listed, but there are a lot of teams that can scrounge up. Look at Lafayette. Lafayette makes the World Series every other year. It seems like James Madison's pretty similar as well. Baylor, South Alabama. South Alabama beat Alabama. I'm worried about game 1. I'm worried already in game 1. South Alabama's got a solid pitcher. Baylor has Gia Rodoni in the circle and Sydney Holman-Manziel, but Gia Rodoni has not looked like this year what she looked like in 2017 during the College World Series run. You expect your 6th-year senior to come back, but so much in the game of softball can change in the span of 4 years. So you got somebody that comes in year number 1. It's a pitcher's game. Year number 1, Paige Lowry's lighting things up. One pitcher in the country is throwing 72, but when she's throwing 72, it's just blowing it by everybody. And if you got a great pitcher, if you got a Gia Rodoni, you're winning games. Fast forward 2 or 3 years, the entire realm of college softball has changed in the fact that, now every pitcher's throwing 70+, and every hitter has seen 70+, the point where that's what they're hitting in practice against. Folks have caught up to it. The hitting in the game of softball and collegiate softball has become so clutch. At this point, there are fewer and fewer one-hit shutouts and more big bomb games where teams are scoring 10+ runs. And Baylor's offense is just not there yet. We've seen sparks of that, but they were shut out against Texas. They put up a couple against Oklahoma. But, you got your Lou Gilberts, you got your Emily Hotz, you got Taylor Ellis, you've got Goose McGlawn, Aaliyah Binford. That 5 right there is really your core in the batting lineup. But outside of that, there's quite a few question marks. And even in that 5, there have been question marks this season. I think if I've got to predict it right now, my ceiling for Baylor, look at the years that they've made it to the World Series. They're always a scrappy team that nobody really sees coming. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Baylor is a World Series caliber team because I don't think they are. I think injuries have a big part of that and why that is. My ceiling right now for Baylor, Coach Moore knows Tim Walton of Florida. He knows this team well. These two teams know each other well. I've got Baylor, best case scenario, knocking off South Alabama. Baylor losing to Florida in the next game. That's going to drop Baylor back down to probably either play South Alabama or South Florida. I've got Baylor winning that one, going to the championship of the Gainesville Regional, winning game 1 against Florida on the arm of Giardoni, falling in game 2. I think the ceiling for Baylor softball this season, where they've injury-ridden, not the year that people would have expected. They're 27-1 right now. I think the highest, the ceiling for Baylor softball right now is to go to the championship in their regional. Where is the floor? Well, the floor is pretty obvious with this one.
Yeah. The
floor is you're playing South Alabama, who beat Alabama. They beat you. Then you go to play in the losers bracket against South Florida. South Florida's been to the World Series in the last decade. South Florida is not a bad softball program. There are no slouches. Then you lose to South Florida. I mean, I've seen plenty of teams. I saw Arkansas do it a couple years ago where they're in a regional and they lose game 1. Then they're playing some weird South Dakota State team and they get beaten that one too. And then there you are, you're home. So ceiling, I've got Baylor winning a game against Florida, going to the regional championship, but Florida eventually advancing to the super regional. Floor, Baylor's out into, you lose your last, I think that'd be losing the last 8-9 games of the season to end this thing, wrap it up, go into next season, and reload, prepare for hopefully better competition next year.
Yeah, I don't see this Baylor softball team making a lot of noise. I've actually been kind of keeping up with it a bit through their Twitter page because I don't have access to their TV, but I know you personally have a ton of time invested into this team, and I think your analysis is pretty spot on. I think the floor is obvious. We lose both the games at the start, and then the ceiling, I just don't see us really getting past that Florida team. I mean, in best case scenario, we get past the Florida team and then end up getting just destroyed in the next round. I just don't think this is a well-rounded enough team that can win series, 3-game series after, back to back to back. So, I'm hopeful. I'm gonna keep checking with the Twitter, but I don't see this team making a ton of noise in the postseason.
I will say on that note, if Baylor is able to make the super regional, the way that I think it looks this year for COVID, I think they would have to play it in Gainesville against that 13 seed. The 13 seed is Duke. I'm not really worried about Duke out of the ACC. The ACC is not a great softball conference. I do think the Washington team that was pissed about being 16 seed, they could have been seeded 13 instead of Duke. So I think if Baylor makes it to the super regional, if they can go to a super regional, they've got a vague shot at going to the College World Series because Duke doesn't scare me near as much as Arizona did when Baylor went to Arizona and won, or near as much as Georgia did when Baylor went to Georgia and won. This Baylor team's scrappy. If they can find their way out of the Florida Regional, the Gainesville Regional, this team can go to the World Series. Past that, though, it's going to be a struggle. A lot of top teams. Moving over to Baylor baseball. Ceiling for Baylor baseball. Beginning of the year, I would have told you, not as an optimist, not as a pessimist, but as a realist, that Baylor baseball would not win 30 games on the season. They likely wouldn't make the postseason. They had a pretty dismal, the pitching, I liked the pitching, but it had been inconsistent. There were some guys that I was like, all right, how good are they going to do this year? The bats were young. The bats were kind of unproven, especially coming out of last year. Well, I was wrong. If I had told you that, I wish we had a video of me saying that somewhere on air. I would have been wrong. So wrong. The 30-16 right now, 22-4 at home. So 7-10 away, 1-2 at neutral sites. That's what's going to hurt them because they're not going to play at home in the postseason. But Baylor baseball, I think their ceiling right now, the ceiling, best case scenario for Baylor baseball, you sweep Oklahoma. It'd be their first conference sweep this season. They had a chance against Kansas State, and they blew it. They had a chance against Kansas. They had a chance against Texas Tech. They had a chance against West Virginia. Couldn't complete sweeps there. Great team sweep. Good teams don't get swept. Baylor hasn't swept yet. Best case scenario, they walk through Oklahoma and sweep the Sooners in Waco for their first conference sweep. At that point, they'd be 33-16, 25-4 at home. That bolsters your resume. You're getting in the postseason at that point for Baylor baseball, no question about it. Then it becomes a game of where do you play. Big 12 championship-wise, I think Baylor's got a legit shot to make it to the semifinal of the Big 12 championship. They've got, a lot of teams play their conference tournament very weird. I'm not going to say that Baylor is a guaranteed lock to win the Big 12 championship or even win a couple of games, but you really never know in conference tournaments. I'd almost not want Baylor to win that. They need to rest up a little bit, just a little bit more. So I would like Baylor. I'd like to see Baylor probably be one of the Final Four in that Big 12 championship tournament. Maybe even go to the championship game, but probably bow out without using up too much or exerting too much. And all along that, I think the best case scenario ceiling-wise for Baylor is to be put in a regional with East Carolina, with Ole Miss, with Louisiana Tech, which I don't know why Ole Miss is still in the conversation of hosting, but they are for some strange reason at division1baseball.com. But give me Ole Miss. I mean, let me switch over here. Louisiana Tech, Stanford, Florida State. I think best case scenario, Baylor baseball, East Carolina, Ole Miss, Louisiana Tech, Stanford, Florida State. If they go to one of those regionals, they got a shot. Here's what it's going to take, though, to go to one of those. The problem with Baylor baseball is the teams that are going to go to those 4 or 5 regionals are the teams that are ranked in the 16 to 24 range in college baseball. Baylor's not there yet. Baylor's not even, their RPI is crawling closer and closer there, but Baylor's going to need to be a ranked team. They're going to need to impress in the last week or so of the season to be able to bolster the resume enough to make it into one of those regionals. If they do not, if the NCAA does what the NCAA usually does and puts teams with a school or a squad near them, they're going to have to go to Fayetteville. They're going to have to go to Nashville to play Vanderbilt. They're going to have to go to Knoxville to play Tennessee. They're going to have to go to Eugene to play Oregon. And in those cases, Baylor baseball is looking at an uphill battle, an uphill climb that's going to be much, much tougher than going to a La Tech, which I know Ruston's tough to play in, but I have a lot more confidence for Baylor at La Tech than I do in Fayetteville. I have a lot more confidence for Baylor in over at Stanford than I do for Baylor playing against Tennessee. A lot more confidence for Florida State. So Baylor's got to bolster that resume. Ceiling is they get into that regional with Stanford. They get into a regional with Florida State, a regional with Ole Miss. They win their regional. I think Baylor's got legitimate regional championship aspirations, and I could see it. That's not even me being an optimist. That's me being a realist. Baylor could make one of those regionals, win a regional, move on to the super regional. At that point, you're looking at who you're playing. Are you playing Vanderbilt? Are you playing Tennessee? Are you playing Arkansas? Are you playing Texas Tech? If you are, Baylor baseball is in trouble. But if you're not, say somebody upsets them in there. You get a random team like a UC Irvine, a Michigan, an Arizona State comes out of nowhere in one of those regionals, and then you're playing them in the super regional. Baylor's got a shot. I think Baylor right now, ceiling for me would be... Stealing for me, Baylor baseball is to make a super regional. I don't think they're a World Series caliber team, not yet this year. I think floor for me, Baylor baseball loses 2 out of 3 against Oklahoma, loses out in 2 in the goes 1-2 in the Big 12 championship, goes to the Fayetteville regional, loses their first game against, we'll say, Dallas Baptist, and then loses their second game to whoever. I don't think they're getting out of the Fayetteville Regional. I've got ceiling being Baylor finishes the season as a 40-plus win team and goes to Super Regional. Floor being they lose the series to Oklahoma, lose out quickly in the Big 12 championship, and go 0-for in a Fayetteville or a Nashville region.
Yeah, I think you're pretty spot on. I had such low aspirations for this team when they went 1-for-3 against UT Rio Grande Valley. So that was kind of my measuring stick at the start of the season. I was like, wow, this team could not win the series versus UT Rio Grande. I was a little bit concerned. Then we lost 2 out of 3 at the Round Rock. My hopes for this team were so low, but they've kind of built something here. They're peaking at the right time. The Kansas State wins were dominant. They won 1 away at OSU, a tough place to play. I think this team is trending in the right direction. I think that if they can win 2 out of 3 at OU, I think they absolutely have the aspirations to make a super regional. I don't know if they can get out of the super regional, but I think they can make it depending on the matchups. And obviously the floor would just be OU comes into Waco and sweeps us. We do horrible at the Big 12 championship, and we get seeded against your Arkansas or another team that's just going to beat the door off us. So I honestly do think, though, if I'm just giving my own opinion, that we have absolute chance to make the super regional based on how we're playing right now. I think baseball is one of those sports that it's how you need to peak at the right time. You can't just carry with your record. So I have pretty high aspirations for this team. I think they're at least going to make a run in the regional, and I think they really could make the super regional.
I think it all comes down to who they are pit against in the postseason. So Baylor baseball, that's what it'll be. On to, so that's baseball. Baseball, softball checked off. Let's go to women's golf now. The women's golf team was number 1 in the country at one point. When they went to Gamecock Intercollegiate, they were number 1 in the country. That Gamecock Intercollegiate is one of the tougher, more really, it's a highly touted golf tournament in collegiate golf. And Baylor ended up finishing in 11th place at the Gamecock Intercollegiate. Now, that's not bad when you compare to the teams they're playing against, but to be the number 1 team in the country, everybody thinks you're number 1, and to place 11th at such a big golf tournament, dropped them to number 8 in the country. They headed to Mountain View. They took 5th at the Mountain View Collegiate. That was tough. Baylor women's golf then tied for 9th at the Ping ASU Invitational. So then you go to Big 12 play. Baylor finishes third in the Big 12 championship tournament. To me, Baylor women's golf at one point this season they were the kings. I mean, they'd won 5 tournaments. They were going to win a national championship. They were a favorite for a national championship, number 1 in the country. They've it's a downward trend since then for Baylor women's golf, placing 3rd in the Big 12 championship when I thought they could have won the Big 12 championship. They were the number 1 team in the country. At one point in time this season, they were better than anybody else. They had a legit shot to win the Big 12 championship. Couldn't pull it off. They finished 11th, the Gamecock Intercollegiate. I think that was telling. 5th place finish at Mountain View was telling. Baylor then gets a 3 seed in the NCAA postseason. I was worried about them in the regional. And let me say this as well. There's a lot of volatility in golf. When you go to the national championship, who knows who's going to place where? Ceiling for me, Baylor was number 1 this season. They've still got a shot to be somewhere in that conversation to win a national championship. They could win a national championship. Ceiling for me is a top 5 finish in the NCAA tournament and a possible national championship if Gerline Core and company really pick it up. Floor, I don't know if Baylor can show up to the championship, but if they continue that downtrend, they can show up but not show out and fall pretty flat in women's golf. So I got ceiling for women's golf this season. Give me national championship aspirations, top 5 finish the NCAA championship. Floor right now, showing up, laying a dud, finishing in that bottom 10 range. There's 24 teams that make it, finishing in that 15 to 20 range for Baylor women's golf. Rob, I know you're a big golf guy. Anything to add right there?
I've played golf. Golf is a game of how you're feeling that day. How's the ball bouncing for you? What's the wind like? If you're in the championship, you can finish first or last. I think in collegiate women's golf, skill is a big part of it, but you also got to get a little lucky. You got to have the bounce working for you. You got to sink big putts. You drive for show, but you putt for dough. So I think it's important that we recognize that golf is such a teetering sport in the fact that the team can shoot really well one day, but then they get unlucky with a couple water hazards, and the team can play poorly but get a couple great hole-in-one bounces. So it's kind of hard to say. If they're in the championship, I really think, from what you said, they have the chance to win, but golf is one of those sports, it's just however the ball is bouncing.
Outside of women's golf, last but not least, obviously not least, the number 1 team in the country in the ITA rankings, the Baylor men's tennis team. This ceiling, without a doubt, not being an optimist again, I'm being a realist. Baylor men's tennis has national championship hopes. Alex Gruskin told us on this show, he said, listen, now that North Carolina is out, now that North Carolina has lost out of this tournament and they're no longer there with the possibility of playing Baylor, there's not another team in the country that can go toe-to-toe with the Bears and give them a run for their money and win 4 points against Baylor. North Carolina swept Oklahoma State, played Georgia, and North Carolina is a much better team, in my opinion, than Georgia, and lost 4-3 in a tough battle. I think Georgia's going to beat Tennessee. Georgia's going to go to the Final Four. History. The history of Georgia tennis is wild. Baylor, TCU today. Ceiling is Baylor beats TCU to go to the national semifinal. They played Georgia. Baylor would be heavy favorites against both Georgia and Tennessee, no matter who wins that. Today's match is going to be tough. I got Baylor getting out of it. Baylor plays Georgia. Baylor beats Georgia in the semifinal. Baylor in the national championship. Florida's going to beat Texas A&M. USC, I think USC Texas is close. Give me USC with the slight nod right there. Give me USC on top. USC, Florida, the national championship. While I would love to play USC, they've already lost this season to Illinois. I think it's going to be Florida, Baylor national championship. That's a 1-2 matchup. Give me the Bears. I don't see another team in this country. Alex Gruskin said it. They can take 4 away from Baylor. Give me Baylor men's tennis for the national championship over Florida. That comes up this Saturday. So Baylor could win a national championship. That's the ceiling for men's tennis right now. You have Adrian Boiton, Matias Soto, Konstantin Franzen, Sven Law. I mean, the list of those guys just goes on. Charlie Broom, that have been so good under Michael Woodson this season. The floor, however, TCU has already beaten Baylor. Granted, it was indoor. Michael Woodson feels like his guys play much better outdoors. But the floor, TCU's good. TCU very well could punch their ticket to the Final Four today by knocking off Baylor in Orlando. That is at 1 p.m. Central Time. That match is going to take place while we're on the show today. And if TCU comes out and wins the doubles point, Baylor won the doubles point in the indoor and lost the match overall. TCU takes a doubles point, then things get hairy. Baylor struggled against TCU in the singles in the Big 12 championship tournament. I think it's going to be a tight match. Tough to beat a team 3 times. Ceiling, national championship over who I believe they'll play Florida. Floor, losing today to TCU, and Baylor's tennis season is done.
I think you mentioned some really big threats. I mean, TCU obviously has beat us, but to me it feels a lot like 05. We have only dropped, one game in this entire tournament so far? Was it 2 sweeps, and then we lost 1 game to Ole Miss? I mean, we're playing great tennis right now. You know, I don't know how TCU's gotten to this point. We have experience against them. It's a rivalry game. The guys are going to be fired up. Michael Woodson, great coach. You know, I have a lot of faith in this team. I really think that national championship should be the goal. I mean, it should be for every sport, but I think it's a very obtainable goal for the men's tennis team. And I think if we beat TCU, I mean, your point makes a lot of sense. Where if we beat TCU, it's kind of we're a huge favorite in the next couple of games. So it's really get past TCU, and we'll see. I think, I mean, the two scenarios in my head is we either lose to TCU today or we beat TCU and win the national championship.
I think so, too. I think it gets easier to me. It does. Rankings-wise, you get Tennessee and Georgia. It gets easier in the national semifinal. I think Baylor wins today. They punch a ticket to the national championship. All eyes will be on that one. I'm excited to watch Michael Woodson and Baylor tennis in a national championship this Saturday. I mean, that's just cool to think about. Cool to say. And they got a shot. So there it is. There's the ceiling and floor for baseball, softball, women's golf, and men's tennis, the 4 teams that are still alive. I mean, by the time we come Monday, there may be only 2 more teams. I guess it'd be baseball and women's golf that are still alive. So cherish Baylor sports while you got them this spring, because things are really winding down. I do want to let you know, first hour of SicEm365's Up Tempo is brought to you by Banson Business Services, owned by Baylor grad and SicEm365 premium member Jonathan Green. Banson Business Services offers a full suite of business support and financial services. Banson specializes in bookkeeping, payroll, outsource CFO services, consulting, and they can help you with your taxes. Their business helps you run your business. Visit SicEm365.com/Banson for more information. All right, when we come back from this break, we got a Jack's Minute. Then we're going to rock and roll with Coach Steve Rodriguez, who joins the show and talks to us about Baylor baseball going into their series tonight against Oklahoma. After Coach Rodriguez, Lou Gilbert, the starting left fielder for Baylor softball, all Big 12, second team in softball this season, talks about the Gainesville Regional, where 27-1 Baylor tries to make some noise against South Alabama, South Florida, and Florida to make a super regional. We come back at Steve Rodriguez, followed by Lou Gilbert. I'm Drake Toll. We got Andrew Robertson and Jack McKenzie coming to you from the studio. We come back talking more Baylor sports. Don't go anywhere. This is Up Tempo.
Today's the day for